Welcome everybody. Today is the day. Finally, at last, the moment you have all been waiting for. Today I'm going to show you my theory for the sequel to Infamous Second Son. But before I reveal my theory, I have to first explain to you what has transpired over the last 7 years in the Infamous universe. My theory won't make any sense until you fully understand the backstory. So grab a snack, get comfy, and remember to stay tuned until the very end. Trust me, you won't want to miss anything I'm going to discuss with you today. So without any further distractions, let's dive right in, starting with the most important aspect of my theory, Paper Trail. Ah, Paper Trail. No one loved you. Nobody wanted to play you. No one wanted to try to understand what you were about or what your purpose was. No one wanted to engage in your fun, interactive online puzzles. Wait, online puzzles? What the hell is this? Love it or hate it, Paper Trail holds many important details about the story of Second Son that you may have missed out on. And that's why I'm here today. I'm going to bring these details to you and explain what is going on in this episodic DLC that no one seemed to care about. If you have played Paper Trail before, this is most likely familiar to you. If you haven't played Paper Trail, then you probably have no idea what this is about. Luckily, you have me here to tell you what the hell is going on. So during the events of Paper Trail, SCEA will leave behind these origami doves, and on the back of the doves you can find these manga comics that form a 21-page story. This story is in fact Celia's own journey. It begins when she has her conduit powers activated 7 years ago, and it ends coincidentally at the end of Second Son. The weird thing about these comics is that they are told from Celia's perspective, but they're written in third-person perspective, which is kind of like having Celia tell the story from a narrator's point of view rather than from her own point of view, if that makes any sense. In this first picture, we can see like a tree village and some rabbit creatures, and this small hooded character is actually Celia. We know this because not only does she wear a white rabbit mask in the game, but also in the comics she has a transformation into a character named Saisei. This is the same name given to her in Augustine's secret mission dialogue. This dialogue can actually be found on Celia's laptop in her apartment after you complete Part 5 of Paper Trail. I'll pull up the dialogue on screen so you can read it along as we go, and things will start to make a lot more sense. Anyway, you can see here we have like a tree village and the rabbit creatures, and then on the bottom they're all turning around and looking at something, and there's a lot of noise. There's a very loud disturbance going on. In this second picture, we can see a group of fox-like creatures with swords and weapons, and they begin chasing after the rabbits and completely destroying this village. They're just wreaking absolute havoc. Now we've got a lot to look at in this particular page. We can see Hattori at the top turning around and looking at her parents who are, well, pretty much dead. They're severely wounded. In the second frame, we can see the foxes standing around looking at all the destruction. In the middle of the second frame, Hattori is over her mother's body. Then down here on the bottom left, we have a shadow of what looks like a giant flying creature. And then in the bottom right, we have a tail up there in between the tree line, presumably coming from the creature, and the foxes are looking up at this creature. Now we have what is the saddest part in the prologue of this comic. Hattori is kneeling down by her mother and just absolutely crying her eyes out as her mother utters her final words. Down in the bottom left, it gives us an overhead view of the scene. We can see Hattori once again leaning over her mother, all these dead rabbits, this destroyed village, and then down towards the bottom, we get a shadow of the head of this flying creature that we saw in the previous page. And then, of course, Hattori turns around and gazes up at this creature to see what it is. Just a side note before moving on to the next page here, I think this is incredibly tragic. I had no idea that this was how Celia lost her parents. I always assumed that they died when the Beast used his Ray Sphere blast that activates all the conduits. I didn't know that it was so prolonged and devastating like this. So moving on, the next page is just a picture of a really giant dragon coming down to make a landing next to Hattori. You can see her at the bottom of the screen here. She looks really small compared to the dragon. And I want you to take note of something. The dragon does not look natural. It doesn't look like it has flesh or bone or blood. It looks very much like a suit of armor. It looks like it's made out of man-made materials, or that it was crafted rather than actually being a living thing. In the next page, we have a conversation between Hattori and the dragon, and I will read it for you. Hittore asks, "Who are you?" And the dragon says, "I am Perotekuta. The Kaioi will return in greater numbers. You must not be here. How can I trust you? What choice do you have?" So now I'm going to bring up that private mission log that I mentioned earlier, and I'm going to give you a quick rundown of what this is basically about. This was found on Celia's laptop, and it says, "Your mission." And it's a conversation between two people, Perotekuta and me, or Saisei. Now later in this story, Hittore goes through a transformation into a character named Saisei. So me is Celia and Perotekuta is Augustine. That means that this dragon in the picture is actually Augustine discovering Celia amongst her dead people. That's absolutely crazy. I mean, just think about it from Augustine's perspective here. You're in a city that's wrought with chaos. You're fighting this massive conduit who has the ability to literally destroy all of humanity. He releases this big, massive blast that kills most of the normal humans in that vicinity. You wake up in a pile of rubble. You stumble around for a bit. Your powers are all over the place. You got concrete swirling around your hands. You're doing stuff you didn't even know you could do before. And you find this girl. This lonely, heartbroken, devastated girl just crying over a pile of dead bodies. And you walk over to her and you're thinking, holy shit, if the military sees this girl, they're going to shoot her on sight. She's a conduit. I have to protect this girl. I have to keep her close to me, because if the military sees me, then they'll recognize me and they'll know I'm not a threat to them even though I have powers. That's what this picture is. Augustine is saying, you can't be here. They're going to come back in greater numbers. You can't be here. And Celia is saying, well, how can I trust you? I just met you. I'm scared. And Augustine says, well, you don't really have a choice right now. It's either come with me and be safe, or stay here and get killed by rioters or the military. And think about it from Celia's perspective for a minute. I mean, Celia's a little scared girl. She was 12 years old when this happened. She's 19 when Second Son takes place. So 7 years ago, she would have been 12 when she got her powers. That's a pretty scary situation for a 12-year-old girl to be in, especially having your parents killed right in front of your eyes. God, that's so terrible. But think about it, really. I mean, you're a little girl, you're scared, your parents are dead, you have no friends left in the world because they've all been murdered before your very eyes, and this orderly, tall, upright, militaristic woman walks toward you with these concrete powers. And I mean, she turns into a freaking scorpion at the end of the game in the final boss fight. So who's to say that this depiction of Augustine as a giant dragon isn't so far-fetched after all? So that tells us that this comic, the first 6 pages of this comic anyway, are telling us the exact same story as Augustine's cutscene. You know, when you drain her powers at the end of the game? I'll play it for you. You can pick out the similarities for yourself. I also want you to pay close attention to the background. When Augustine pauses in between her sentences, you can hear a female voice whispering certain words that Augustine used in her dialogue. I think this voice is Celia trying to tell the story from her perspective, which is why she only repeats certain words.
7 years ago, my unit was there to save lives from a new threat. Conduits. People with powers that no one understood. They had the power to kill. And the power to transform some of us into conduits too. I found another survivor. She tailed me as I made my way back to the safety of my battalion. Together we traveled through a lawless city that wanted us dead because of what we now were. Every day, people joined the lynch mob, horrified by the thought of conduits hiding among them. We'd hurt no one, but they could only see us as monsters.
I don't just think that's Celia's voice because she's in the cutscene. I also think it's her voice because it sounds like Celia's voice actress. I'm going to play you a clip from the paper trail ending cutscene, and you can rewind the video and watch the Augustine cutscene again. I want you to compare the audio between the two cutscenes. Listen to the whispering voice, and then listen to Celia's voice from the paper trail cutscene, and then tell me they don't sound alike, because I sure as hell think they do.
When Augustine took me in, I was nothing but a scared little girl. She locked me away to keep me safe. But when I got to Seattle and saw the chaos you had wrought, nothing, no one could touch you. You were unstoppable. You were free.
One more thing I'd like to mention about this picture before we move on. Augustine says the Kaioi will return in greater numbers. I have a feeling that the word Kaioi actually stands for military. Let's replace the word and see how it fits. The military will return in greater numbers. You must not be here. It makes sense because Augustine is the military. She's aware of military protocol, she knows how the military operates, and she also knows that the military does not like conduits. So Augustine is telling Celia, hey look, I'm with the military. If they see me, they'll recognize me. You need to stick with me so that when they do come back, whether it's for a relief effort or they want to find more rogue conduits, whatever the reason is, if you're with me, they might not shoot you on sight. Also keep in mind here, Augustine says they will return in greater numbers. Return where? To the village. You're probably thinking right now, Ian, what the hell? Why would the military attack a random village or a small suburb of a city? Well, there's quite a few possibilities. The first one is that it was collateral damage. The military was fighting the beast, which we know was true. They got backed into the part of town where Celia lived, and her home got destroyed by accidental collateral damage. But I'm a sucker for conspiracy theories, so I like the second possibility better than the first. The second one is that the military was sent in beforehand to evacuate all the civilians. Any civilians that refused to leave or were left behind in the city got executed. But why would the military do that? Think about it like this for a minute. If you have a riot or an attempted revolution with normal humans, it's fairly simple for a well-equipped police force or military to keep them at bay. You can throw tear gas into the crowd, you can beat them with batons, you have riot shields, and in some extreme cases you can use guns. If you have a riot or an attempted revolution with conduits, that is a completely different monster that would be very difficult for a military to control, even a well-equipped one. So how does the military go about removing this threat? Simple. They frame the conduits. I'll use Augustine's origin story as bad example number one. The military goes into this city, and everybody's rooting and cheering for them. Oh my god, the military's gonna stop the beast, they're gonna save us all, yeah! And the military goes in there, they evacuate the civilians, and any civilians that do not want to leave or refuse to leave are executed. The military can then go to public media and get on live television and make up a story blaming the conduits. You know, I can just see a US military general or commander getting on US TV news during an interview and saying something like this.
We tried to save as many as we could, but their attack was relentless. These, what should I call them, bioterrorists, killed innocent civilians, destroyed homes, schools. These freaks should not be allowed to walk among us, posing a threat to our national security and our citizens. Rest assured, the US military is doing its part to shut these bastards down and keep you safe at night.
And the sad part is, the general public would believe this. You see, back then, during this time of crisis, people were afraid of conduits. People are scared of what they don't understand, and nobody understood what conduits were or why they could have these incredible powers. So naturally, everybody feared them. So basically, the military is causing a problem and then blaming the problem on something that people have a fear of, so then those people will then say, yeah, get rid of that fear, protect us, go take on those nasty terrorists. And the military will look like the good guys while doing it. I'm sure you guys have seen a movie or a TV show where the bad guy is loved by the public, so he tries to make the good guys look like the bad guys. Yeah, that's pretty much the same thing that's happening right here. But the military's plan would backfire. You see, Augustine was the only conduit the government trusted, and Augustine herself was torn between two worlds. She had been taught by the military that conduits were bloodthirsty, murderous monsters. But when she became one herself and she realized that she didn't have the urge to go murder a bunch of people for no reason, it was like an awakening. It was a revelation. It was, holy crap, I'm a conduit and nothing's changed. I'm still the same person. If I am still the same person as a conduit, What about all the other people with powers too? This is all going through Augustine's head now. What if we're wrong about them? What if they are innocent? Now, of course, Augustine already knew that the military and the government hated conduits. They thought they were monsters and freaks, and no amount of explaining or begging or pleading would change their mind. So instead of trying to go out to the public and tell them that conduits weren't evil and try to win over the public's trust, Augustine made another option, the D.U.P. And of course, the rest is history. Of course, she went on to recruit an army and construct a permanent establishment for her conduit brothers and sisters. Actually, Curtin K Station is an anagram. If you rearrange the letters, it spells Conduit Sanctuary. In case you haven't noticed already, we do get to see Curtin K Station in this frame, and in the next one we get an up-close shot of the prison with images of 3 characters on the bottom of the screen. These characters from left to right are Hank, Fetch, and Eugene in their respective manga forms. And then of course we have other dragons which represent other D.U.P. soldiers or guardians. I also think it's kind of funny that Eugene is portrayed as a chicken because, you know, he's shy and he doesn't like to be social or anything, so that is some subtle comedy at its finest. This next picture looks a little bit different from the others because I had to take a direct screenshot of it. The file that I saved did not have any dialog boxes, and I wanted you guys to be able to read that, so I had to take a direct screenshot. But our scene here does look kind of weird. We see up at the top it says, "This was no place for Hittore. Loneliness drank the life from her veins." And then we see she's sitting in a corner, and then she starts making these funny noises, and then she starts throwing up what looks like this orb of light out of her mouth. And continued in the next page, we see this light being coming out of her body and standing upright in the room, and it says, "But in death she gained new life." So what the last 2 pages are trying to tell us is that while Celia was in Curtin K, she went through a massive transformation. Under Augustine's supervision and probably some very rigorous training, she went from Hittore, the shy, scared little girl that she was, to Saisei, this paper-wielding, badass murder machine that we all know from Paper Trail. This is where things will begin to look familiar. You can see here, it's a pretty big scene actually. It says, "Saisei left and went into the world. The others found their own way out." We have a big mountain in the background with Celia on top of the mountain, a whole shit ton of D.U.P. Troops following from left to right, Eugene, Hank, and Fetch. This is the escape scene at the very beginning of Second Son when they bust out of that military truck. So these pictures aren't incredibly important to the story of the comic. These are just telling us what happened to our 3 characters that we all meet in the game. From the left we have Eugene. It says Ushinada, who went back to playing games. There's some foxes up at the top of his picture picking on some rabbits. And you might be wondering, well, if the foxes are the military, then how come this doesn't happen in the story of Second Son? I have a feeling that during this comic, the foxes are supposed to represent a villain, not just a specific faction or an enemy, just a villain in general. So the foxes, from Eugene's perspective, would be the D.U.P. bullying on suspected conduits. In the middle, we have Hank. It says, "And Kimuri, who swore he'd never hurt anyone." Now for Hank's picture, I have no idea what event in the game this is relating to. We see Hank hiding in some bushes, and then he jumps out and destroys this carriage with a giant flaming ball of smoke. Once again, I have no idea what part of the game this is. I have a very faint idea, though, that this may actually be Reggie's death. And my only reasoning to believe that is one of 2 things. Number 1, the carriage is being pulled by dogs. Dogs are often used in the police force, obviously. Hell, sometimes cops themselves are even called the hounds of law. Number 2 is because it says, "who swore he would never hurt anyone" in the second dialogue box. Hank took pride in never hurting a single soul in any of his heists or robberies or prison breakouts, so when he found out that Reggie was dead because of him, he probably blamed himself for that. But like I said in the first place, I have absolutely no idea what this picture is trying to reference that happened in the actual game. So if any of you guys have a better idea, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And on the far right, last but most certainly not least, we have Fetch, and it says, "Inazuma, vengeance now her drug of choice." It makes perfect sense. This is obviously Fetch. We have these little monkeys dressed up in hats and suits, and there's a syringe down there at the bottom of the screen. Clearly an obvious reference to Fetch, because she used to be on real drugs, and now her drug of choice is vengeance for what the dealers did to her and Brent. Now with this next image, I believe we have a typo in one of the dialogue boxes. I'll read the page to you and then explain why I think there's a typo. But Saisei's favorite was a new playmate named Fukushu. She would tell her stories and they would laugh for hours on end, but they drew attention. Here's where I think the typo comes in. If we actually look at the image, we can see Celia on the ground laughing her ass off next to this two-headed bird creature. Now, we can draw a couple of clues from this creature itself. First and foremost, its appearance. It has two heads, one is light with dark eyes, the other is dark with light eyes. This is extremely strikingly similar to Delson's Karma logo on the back of his vest. The white side of the bird has red eyes, and the red side has white eyes. This also represents the player's ability to choose good or evil throughout the story. And finally, again, if we look at the private mission dialogue, we can see there is a character named Fukushu. Now, if you want to pause the video and actually read this for yourself, you'll be able to see that the character called Fukushu is noted with the ability of being able to copy other conduits' powers. If that's not enough proof, a little bit further down the mission dialogue, Augustine tells Celia, "Your Fukushu is the bioterrorist Delson Rowe." So here's where the typo comes in. Remember, this story is being told by Celia from a third-person perspective, which means she will never refer to herself in the story as I or me. She will always refer to herself in the story as her. So if you look down at the bottom, it says she would tell her stories and they would laugh for hours on end. Well, we know that the word her is referencing Celia, not only because of what I just said a minute ago, but also because you can see in the image Delson is telling Celia something and she's laughing absolutely hysterically. So the typo is the word she at the beginning of the sentence. Who is the she that would tell Celia stories? It can't be Fukushu because Fukushu is Delson and Delson is most definitely not a she. So that's why I think this is a typo. If it's not a typo, then the only other explanation I have is that Celia wrote the word she on purpose in order to confuse Delson, because after all, he is the one picking up and reading these comics when she leaves them behind at the crime scenes. One more thing I want to say about this image before continuing. I don't think Celia and Delson were ever actually friends, judging by the gameplay of Paper Trail. I think what this scene is trying to tell us is that Celia is a bit childish, and she thought it was fun to have Delson chase her around the city and leave the little paper scraps with the comics at the crime scene, and just the entire gameplay of Paper Trail and how you chase Celia everywhere, and she's like, "Oh, come on, Delson, come get me, Delson," and then she just keeps running around on top of the skyscrapers and everything, and Delson's like, "Stop, wait up, I'm not gonna hurt you." And I think because Celia is finally free after 7 years of being inside Curtain K, that taste of freedom is fun, it's exciting, and Delson is her new playmate, as she calls him, because she thinks it's fun to have him chase her around the city and play this game of, like, makeshift conduit tag. And then in the far right, we see a bunch of D.U.P. guardians coming down, and in the next image, Augustine swoops down right next to Delson and says, "I fail to see the humor." Then Delson looks her right in the face. It's actually kind of spooky seeing Fukushu's face up close. That looks really creepy. And he says, "Look harder," and then he attacks Augustine. And on the next page, we have Celia looking up at them as they duke it out, and it says, "An epic battle of good versus evil, but the roles were debatable." And then Delson flies away, and Augustine is severely wounded, and Celia runs over, and she's absolutely worried sick about Augustine. These two scenes are incredibly important to the backstory of Second Son because they are depicting the entire struggle between Delson's dichotomy and Augustine's dichotomy. And Celia doesn't know what to do. She loves Augustine because Augustine's like a mother to her. She's protected her and taught her all these really important things, and she's been a guiding figure in Celia's life. But she looks up to Delson because he's very headstrong, he's not afraid, and when he sets his mind to something, he gets it done. So we have two sides of the coin here. We have, I'd rather play it safe than sorry, let's keep the conduits locked up and protected, and let's not address the bigger issue here. And then we have the other side of the coin, which is, I'm tired of being locked up, I'm tired of being controlled, I'm tired of being scared. Screw these guys, let's go kick their asses. And he gets shit done. Look at this for a second. It's taken Augustine 7 years to collect conduits and then train them individually, and some of the trainees even became D.U.P soldiers. She trained them so well that they wanted to enroll in the program and get put to work, just like Augustine mentions in First Light.
Most D.U.P agents were once like you. Lost conduits that needed my help focusing their abilities. But to get the job, they had to survive. Very good, Miss Walker. Keep impressing me like this, I'll put you to work. Take a seat.
Okay guys, this is the 18th picture. We're almost done. Just stick with me a little bit longer here. Now in this image we have Celia on the left side, really up close to Augustine, petting her snout, which is metaphorical of her trying to comfort Augustine and maybe relieve some of the pain and heal her up from the damage that she incurred during the battle with Delsin. I have a feeling that this image takes place directly after the first boss fight with Augustine on the island when Reggie dies. Augustine returns to her tower, and Celia, being her spy slash secret agent slash daughter figure, is obviously there waiting for her return. When Augustine comes back wounded and damaged, Celia is really sad. She's trying to take care of Augustine the best she knows how because Augustine's taken care of her for 7 years. So what kind of a daughter would she be not to take care of her mother figure? I know they're not really related, but still, it's an emotional attachment thing. So if we read the image, we have a conversation between Celia and Augustine. Again, she says, "I did what you told me, sought vengeance and retribution, sowed chaos." And Augustine says, "Good, good." So on the right hand side, we can see images of Celia dressed up as Fetch, Eugene, and Hank. And this is supposed to tell us that it was Celia all along who was framing the conduits. She hung the drug dealer on the sign of the crocodile at the beginning of Paper Trail. She was the one who drove that sword through the chest of the lawyer and hung her on the Heaven's Hellfire billboard. She was the one who blew up the governor's car, and she's trying to frame the conduits to make them look bad so that people will want the D.U.P to stay around. It's all part of their conspiracy theory. So yes, Celia was the conduit who framed Hank, Fetch, and Eugene, all as a part of Augustine's plan to keep Curtain K funded and active, so she could protect more conduits. Okay, picture 19. Once again, I'm going to read it to you out loud and then I'll explain what it means. "Come closer, Kaioi, and you die." No. Why shouldn't I? Kill them and more will come. They are too many. Too strong. No. You are too weak. Saisei? Saisei! So allow me to explain what exactly is going on in this image. We have Celia standing in front of Augustine telling the foxes if they come any closer, they're going to die. Like I established earlier, the foxes represent an enemy. And from Augustine's perspective, the enemy of the D.U.P is the military. Now, if you remember, during the story of Paper Trail, there was actually a mission where we had to track down military surveillance vans and find out why they were in the city undercover. And we discovered they were in the city to closely monitor Augustine's operation. They wanted to find out what she was getting at and what exactly she was trying to accomplish. The military had double agents inside the D.U.P reporting Augustine's every move to them already. They already knew the government had stopped funding the D.U.P and that Curtain K was going to be shut down. With all other conduits being transferred into military custody, the military themselves saw this as a perfect opportunity to take Augustine where she stood. Then Celia gets very angry with Augustine, asking why she shouldn't attack them. Now remember, Celia has been in captivity for 7 years. The D.U.P has been afraid of firing the first bullet for 7 years. Celia has been wanting to take action for so long, and Augustine just won't let her. Augustine tries to explain that there's too many. If you kill them, more will come, and more after that, and more after that. There's too many. Celia then proceeds to tell Augustine that she is too weak to take action. Augustine then becomes worried and questions Celia's actions, trying to get her attention by saying her name, then looking up and shouting at her as Celia leaps forward with her jaws wide open. So this image is particularly interesting because not all of the frames in the image take place during the same time. For example, the first 3 frames take place considerably earlier than the last 3 frames. I also want to point out that the very first frame in this image probably didn't happen the way it's depicted. Celia was protecting Augustine from the military, yes, but I don't think the military was actually there physically with guns and handcuffs ready to take Augustine in. I think that scene was more of a political standoff in the actual real world. You know that part in the game when you defeat Augustine for the first time and that news broadcast comes on? And they talk about how the people are sick of the D.U.P. in the city, they want the conduits to leave, they want the whole thing to be over with. Celia and Augustine knew they had to act now or the military would seize the opportunity to shut them down. Celia wanted to strike first, but Augustine kept shutting her down time after time, and this time she was sick of it. And she becomes very upset with Augustine and then immediately betrays her. However, I don't think that's how it happened in the real world. I think it went something like this. Celia got mad at Augustine for not wanting to strike the military first. She stood down to Augustine just long enough to see what her plan was. But Celia had already made up her own mind. If we look at the last message in the private mission dialogue, it will explain exactly what I mean. You will never read these words. In the end, I could have saved you, but instead, I watched your destruction. I had to know whose purpose was stronger, yours or his. Now I know. You were the only mother I ever knew, and I loved you. But I found a new teacher, one who is not afraid, and it is his example I will follow. I know you would be proud. Goodbye, Perotekuta. I have no need of your protection any longer. Now I will wait for you, Fukushu, at the chosen place, to show you what you have taught me. This is obviously Celia sending Augustine a message through the private channel they set up to communicate with. If we dissect this message, there's a couple interesting things we can find out. The first thing is where it says, I could have saved you, but instead, I watched your destruction. So what this sentence tells us is that the last 3 frames in this image take place during the final boss fight with Augustine. And the message tells us that Celia was present during the battle itself. I could have saved you tells us that she was close enough to the battle to step in and stop Delsin, thus saving Augustine. But she chose not to, and by choosing not to help Augustine, she effectively betrayed her. This next image is kinda weird and gruesome, but it's also a very huge metaphor. But as Saisei already knew, death is as much a part of us as life. Death is not an ending. Death is a transformation, a sublime transcendence, and a beginning. If you're not absolutely shitting your pants right now, please allow me to elaborate for you. You may not have realized it, but these 2 pages do not relate to any event that took place during Second Son. That's because the pictures aren't a metaphor for something that's already happened or is currently happening in the present. They're hinting towards the future. A sequel. Let's look at the evidence here. First and foremost, we have these 2 images with the dialogue boxes talking about how death is not an ending. It's a transformation, as coincidentally we have Celia transforming into a new character, and how death is also a beginning. Let me remind you that this is not the first time a video game or movie or book has used this kind of metaphor and left off with a beginning at the end to sequel bait the audience. This is, however, the first time that I've noticed the sequel baiting has been done in a form of media outside the main title. Usually it's done at the end of a game, a character will turn around and say something and there's a big cliffhanger and you're waiting 2 or 3 years for them to make the sequel. But this time, Sucker Punch decided to just close the game off nice and clean and leave the cliffhanger for those who really searched for it. If you were strong enough and a diehard fan enough to play through Paper Trail and go through all those online puzzles, they left this little gold nugget of information here, this little teaser, for us hardcore fans to find. Sucker Punch, bravo to you guys, seriously. That is so outstandingly clever. Second Son has been out for 2 years now, and I just noticed this 3 months ago when I decided to read these comics out of boredom. I already read it 4 or 5 times beforehand, but this time was different. I started dissecting the dialogue, trying to find out what it really meant, trying to see how the pictures and the words related to things that happened in the game. I started paying close attention to the tiny little details in the pictures, and when I noticed the clues peppered throughout the comic left like a paper trail for us to follow, I was left utterly speechless. I'm going to share my discovery with you, and hopefully you'll be just as astonished as I was. Let's examine this final page right here. Celia has gone through her transformation. She still has the rabbit face and the ears, which is why she wears an origami rabbit mask in the game. She's kept her cape, but the rest of her body is completely different. Some of you may have already noticed by now, some of you may have not, but her body is identical to Augustine's from the beginning of the comic. This is an absolutely massive hint that gives us a great amount of information to start brainstorming our own ideas for a sequel. This page is so important because Celia is telling us her intentions, her plans, her future story through not only the dialogue, but also the image itself. Let me explain exactly what I mean. I'm going to compare these two pictures and hopefully I'll be able to convey my thoughts onto you. The most noticeable and probably only similarity between these two images is that Celia and Augustine's bodies look identical. This is a very symbolic hint that Celia will be taking Augustine's place. Now notice the differences. Celia still has her own face, which means her personality, her way of doing things, and her goals will be transferred over into her new position. What is her new position? Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, inFAMOUS fans all around, it's time for me to finally reveal my theory for the next inFAMOUS. Based on evidence I've gathered from this comic, paper trail, and the events of Second Son, I predict our next inFAMOUS will feature Celia taking the mantle as the leader of a reformed D.U.P. and waging all-out war against the military. I've already explained how this picture tells us that Celia is taking Augustine's position. What I haven't explained is how it tells us that she's going after the military. Let's take a look at picture 19 again. I've already established that the Kaioi, or the foxes, are the military. We also know that Celia is tired of being oppressed, tired of waiting, and tired of being scared. She hates the military for what they've done, and she's always wanted to get vengeance. Augustine was the only thing holding her back. But now, with Augustine out of the way, there would be no more waiting, no more cowering in the shadows, no more playing it safe. Now Celia could enact her own agenda, getting revenge on the true enemy that has plagued conduits for the last 7 years. If that's not enough proof for you, just take a look at Celia. She's holding a fox in one hand and crushing one in the other. Look at the bodies scattered beneath her feet, peppered with blood. These are all great indicators that she's using her newfound power and authority to finally attack the military after 7 long years of anxiously waiting. I do have more ideas for this sequel. I've been brainstorming a lot recently. But right now, I just want to thank Sucker Punch immensely for doing this. I never would have guessed that the cliffhanger, the sequel bait, would be tucked away in a comic only for the true fans to discover. The way you executed this, how you hid it away as a little treasure for us to find, was ingenious. Thank you guys so much. This makes me view Second Son in a completely different light than I did before. I used to view Second Son as a pretty bad game. I didn't think it stood up to the other games in the series, but now I see it as more of a prologue to an epic story that we have yet to experience, and that makes me all the more excited for the sequel. So there it is, everybody, my theory based on evidence for the next chapter in the inFAMOUS story. Thank you again, Sucker Punch, and thank you for watching this video. Tell me what you think in the comments. Don't forget to leave a like. You know what? Let's see if we can get 1,000 likes on this video. I've never really done that before. Let's shoot for 1,000. Subscribe to my channel for more content like this, and share this video with all your friends. I really hope you enjoyed this theory, and I can't wait to see what Sucker Punch has to offer us next. And with that, I'll leave you guys to come up with your own ideas. I'll catch you all later.